Alright, this one is going to be quick. This is talking about my rabbit setup. So, in my last video, I talked about coyote setup for hunting. And that was a longer one, considering I had to talk about how many different arrow builds I use on one hunt for coyote and predators because of some of these situations they present. But I was talking about how with something like a bunny, there's not as many situations, so you can build specific arrow and bring only that kind of arrow. And for bunny hunting, I actually use really light arrows, for me anyway. So these are my gold tip hunter 500 spines. These are, 500, so they're nice and bendy, not too bendy. They're still stiff enough because I had 150 extra grains in the front with their weight adjustment system, which is really cool. The gold tip has that. One reason I love them so much, these adapters. Each one's 50 grains. I talk about them all the time. But either way, for rabbit hunting, I use these guys, the 500 spines, and with that extra 150 grains in the front and 125 grain head, it comes out total to around 510 to 520 grains, and in between there. So it's a very light, for me, arrow. And so it's good for, very long distance shooting, or for shooting something, getting that arrow there lickety split, and not having to worry as much about arrow weight because it's smaller game. Because, if it's a bunny, you don't need a 340, 600 spine, 600 grain arrow that can go straight through a fucking elk. That would just be overkill, and you're putting the arrow and the broadhead at risk at that point because it's going to be hitting whatever is behind that bunny at the same velocity because it's not losing energy in the hit. So, light arrows are the way to go with light game. And that's what I found anyway, because I've used both, and the heavy arrows, they take some damage if you use them in light game. But these light guys, they do what they are meant to do. So the other advantage of light arrows, especially with smaller game, is things like rabbits, possums, all these things that you might be hunting for smaller game. They're quick. They're very fucking fast. And, coyote and deer and all those are fast too, but smaller game, when they're just as fast, it makes it 40 billion times harder to hit than that larger game is. Because you can see that larger game as it moves, it doesn't seem like it's going as fast. That little rabbit, it could be moving the exact same speed as something like a deer, but it's going to look like a goddamn lightning bolt because it's only, this big. They're not big. So you're going to want speed, and you're going to make sure that arrow gets there as fast as you shot it. And these are as close as you can get to that without taking away power. So that's why I use them. And then that's it for the arrow, basically. I almost always, 100% of the time, I'm going to be using these 500 spines on rabbits just because they're the most ethical and they make the most sense. They get there quick and they're lightweight, so I'm not wasting energy. Now to the head, that's where it gets interesting for rabbits because I change a lot. Last time, I was using the same that I use for coyotes, these big tontos, just because they work really well and they'll drop them in a millisecond. My last one, I got an arterial shot in the neck. It was gone like that. So it's insanely humane. It's as humane as you can probably get with bow hunting. But I actually do like to fluctuate with rabbits and try other things like, where did I throw them? I have a whole box of them somewhere. Sorry for that. Oh, there they are. Okay. Sometimes I use things like judos and blunts. There's a couple good examples. There we go. So for judos, I might have something like a blunt judo, which is something like these guys, classic judo little connector guys, and then a blunt tip. And the only thing about the judos is they're really just meant so if you hit grass and stuff like that, near or behind the animal, the arrow isn't going to continue. It's going to stop right there, and it's not going to, get lost in the brush like I've lost many arrows. And then there's something like this, similar thing, still got the hooks, but it's got a head punch, which is kind of similar to like a Muzzy 1 tip, where it is like a 3-point, like bodkin kind of style, Tonto tip. It's an interesting thing, but they're cool. But they're really only good for headshots, I found, with those. And it's the same with these. These guys are hammers, two different sizes. This is 100 grain, this 125. And these are great, actually. I'd say they're a little better than the judos just because of the way they deliver their energy. These can punch a hole straight through half-inch plywood. They're cool. They're literally hammers. I love these things. But The only problem you might run into is if you don't hit a good vital zone, like the whole rib cage and lung area or head area on the bunny, the blunts don't work very well, because if you hit a bunny in the ass with a blunt, it's going to get up and run away. It's going to break a bone, it's going to be sad, and at that point you're just injuring an animal and being a piece of shit. So that's the one part about blunts that I don't like, because if, say someone, you bring out a buddy who's not as good at archery and he shoots a bunny, hits it in the ass and it runs away, it doesn't die, it just slowly bleeds out in pain. That's just disgusting, and then I'd rather have to go find that bunny myself. But that's why blunts are something you should think, should I or should I not use that? Because you're putting it on more risk of not getting an ethical shot. Because, on a bunny with a big, even a shitty muzzy one, I'm not shitting on them, but I'm not a fan of these broadheads because they're not cut on contact. Even with this, it would be much more humane, because even if you hit it in the butt, it's going to stick in, it's going to stay, and it's going to make a big cut. So it's still going to be bleeding out enough to, within 20 minutes, it'll die. It's ethical enough to not feel bad, at least. But either way, you shouldn't be making ass shots. You should be making good shots. So, one should be fine. And that's just kind of a little quick, non-needed rant, but that's what I found anyway. I've had a buddy come out once and actually get to go bow hunting for rabbit with me, and he wasn't as experienced, and he didn't get one of them because of the accuracy problems, and that's what worries me about blunts, because if sense of that, you're not going to be getting a perfect shot, and you know it. So if it's someone who's unexperienced and they miss a shot, get a shoddy shot with a blunt, you're hurting the animal at that point. You're just being like torturous. It's not good behavior. So that's my opinion on blunts. They're good when they work, but if you don't get them in a vital area, they're not any good. But other than that, for rabbit, it's all open at this point. You can use any fucking head you want to on a rabbit. Literally anything. They're almost, I wouldn't say they're good testing because they're so small you're not going to really see penetration and stuff like that, but you can see what it's going to do to flesh. And that is a really good way to test certain broadheads and things like that. Like, one of the first things I tested when I was first starting was stuff like, Magnus, which I still really love and appreciate Magnus. I will never not like Magnus heads. It's just that I'm more of a single bevel person now. I like single bevel heads and the way they perform more. But if I'm going double bevel, man, it's probably going to be a Magnus. And, something like this would be insanely excellent, because if you get arterial neck shot, something like that, it's going to drop it within literally the flick of your finger, as opposed to hitting it with a blunt or hitting it with like a muzzy one and in not as good of an area, or even in a good area. It might take a little longer. You might have to trail it a little bit. But like I said, everything changes depending on where you hit the animal and what you're using. So that's it for my bunny setup, really. There's not too much more to it. I just fluctuate with heads more than anything. The arrow stays the same, the 500 spine, 520 to 510 grains. And then, I use the same lighted nocts for almost all hunting. I use nocturnals. Sometimes I use off-brands and other things, but mostly nocturnals because they're just a hardy go-to. But yeah, and I would say if you personally maybe use a different setup, try it. Try using the lighter arrows and experimenting with heads with it, because, bunny hunting's fun. You can do it as much as you want. So it gives you a chance to really play with your tools, see what you can do with them, and you don't just have to do that. Like, sometimes, like when I was first testing out my 600 grain arrows and how much force they really put into flesh and stuff like that, I did it on rabbits just to see what kind of cuts they do and stuff, and it was a perfect medium for that. So it's good things to think. Other than that, that's everything for my rabbit setup. If you got any questions, comments, tips, anything like that, throw them in the comments. I'm always happy to hear them. Other than that, that's everything. So much love, everybody. Stay lifted and lucky hunting.